You will hear a telephone conversation between two friends called Julie and Nick about cheap accommodation in the city of Darwin, Australia. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6.
Hi Nick, it's Julie. Have you managed to find any information about accommodation in Darwin?
Hi, I was just going to call you. I found some on the internet. There are quite a few hostels for backpackers there. The first possibility I found was a hostel called Top End Backpackers.
Okay.
It's pretty cheap. You can get a bed in a dormitory for $19 per person. Private rooms cost a bit more, but we'll be okay in dormitories, won't we?
Sure.
So, that hostel has parking, though that doesn't really matter to us, as we'll be using public transport.
Yeah. Are there any reviews on the website from people who have been there?
Well, yes. They aren't all that good, though. Some people said they didn't like the staff. They had an unfriendly attitude.
That's quite unusual in a hostel. Usually all the staff are really welcoming.
That's what I thought. People said they liked the pool and the fact that the rooms had air conditioning. But the problem with that was that it was very noisy, so they were kept awake. But it was too hot if they turned it off, so they had to put up with it.
Someone told me there's another hostel called Gumtree something.
Gumtree Lodge. It costs a bit more, $45 a person.
What?
Oh, no, that's for private rooms. It's $23.50 for the dorms.
That's more like it.
It looks to be in quite a good location. A bit out of town and quiet, but with good transport and quite near a beach.
Has it got a pool?
Yes, and its own gardens. The reviews for that one are mostly okay, except for one person who said they couldn't sleep because there were insects flying around in the dormitories.
Not for me then. And I'd rather be somewhere central, really.
Right. There's a place called Kangaroo Lodge. They've got dorms at $22, and it's downtown, near all the restaurants and clubs and everything. So that should suit you. And it doesn't close at night.
So there's always someone on reception? That sounds good.
The only criticism I saw was that the rooms were a bit messy and untidy because people just left their clothes and stuff all over the beds and the floor.
Don't hostels usually have lockers in the bedrooms where you can leave your stuff?
Yeah, they do usually, but apparently they don't here. Still, hostels are never particularly tidy places, so that doesn't bother me. And the same person said that the standard of cleanliness was pretty good, and especially the bathrooms. They were excellent as far as that went.
Right. Yeah, I reckon Kangaroo Lodge sounds the best.
Me too. Quite a lot of people reviewing it said it was really fun there. Like every night everyone staying there got together and ended up having a party. So it sounds like it's got a really good atmosphere.
Okay, let's go for that one.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you will have some time to look at the questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Did you get the address of Kangaroo Lodge?
Yes, it's on Shadforth Lane.
Can you spell that?
Shadforth. It's near the transit centre, where the intercity buses and the airport buses drop you off.
Cool. I'm really looking forward to this. I've never stayed in a hostel before. Do they provide bed linen, sheets and things?
Yeah. And you can usually either bring your own towel or hire one there. but they don't usually provide those for free.
Okay. And what happens about meals?
Well, you don't have to pay extra for breakfast. It varies a lot in different places, but generally it's okay. And there's usually a cafe where you can buy a snack or a hot meal for lunch. But actually, if you're really travelling on the cheap, usually for every 5 or 6 rooms, there's a kitchen where you can knock up a snack, and that saves a lot of money.
Great. Right, well, shall I go ahead and book that?
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 2. You will hear a guide at an outdoor sculpture park talking to a group of visitors. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Anglia Sculpture Park. Right, well, the idea behind the sculpture park is that it's a place where works of art, such as large sculptures and carvings, can be displayed out of doors in a natural setting. As you'll have noticed when you drove here, most of the land around the park is farmland. The park itself belonged to a family called the TECHNICS, who had made a lot of money from manufacturing farm machinery and who also owned substantial stretches of forest land to the north of the park. They built a house in the centre of the park, not far from where we're standing now, but this burnt down in 1980 and the TECHNICS then sold the land. The Anglia Sculpture Park isn't the only one in the country. Several of the London parks sometimes display contemporary sculptures, and there are a couple of other permanent sculpture parks in England. But we're unique in that some of our sculptures were actually created for the sites they occupy here, and we also show sculptures by a wider range of artists than anywhere else in the country. For example, at present we have an exhibition by Joe Tremaine of what he calls burnt sculptures. These are wood and stone sculptures that he's carved and marked with fire to illustrate the ferocity and intensity of the forces that have shaped our planet over millions of years. They look really dramatic in this rural setting. To see some of the sculptures, you'll need to follow the path alongside the lower lake. We had to renovate this after the lake overflowed its banks a couple of months ago and flooded the area. The water level's back to normal now, and you shouldn't have any trouble. The path's very level underfoot. You should be back at the visitor centre at about 4 o'clock. If you have time, it's worth taking a look at the centre itself. It's not possible to go upstairs at present, as builders are working there adding another floor, but the rest's well worth seeing. The architect was Guy King. He was actually born in this part of England, but he recently designed a museum in Canada that won a prize for innovation in public buildings. If you want to get something to eat when you get back, like a snack or a sandwich, the terrace room is currently closed, but you can go to the kiosk and buy something, then sit on one of the chairs overlooking the lower lake and enjoy the view as you're eating.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you will have some time to look at the questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Now, let me just tell you a bit about what you can see in the sculpture park. If you look at your map, you'll see the visitor centre, where we are now, at the bottom, just by the entrance. Since we only have an hour, you might not be able to get right around the park, but you can choose to visit some of the highlights. You might like to take a look at the Joe Tremaine sculptures, which are displayed on this side of the upper lake, just behind the education centre and near the bridge. They're really impressive, but please remember not to let your children climb on them. One of our most popular exhibitions is the Giorgio Catalucci bird sculptures. They're just across the bridge on the north side of the lower lake. I love the way they're scattered around in the long grass beside the lake, looking as if they're just about to take to their wings. You could also go to the garden gallery. It's on this side of the upper lake. From the visitor centre, you go to the education centre, then keep on along the path and you'll see it on your right. There's an exhibition of animal carvings there which is well worth a look. We also have the Longhouse. That's quite a walk. From here, you go to the bridge and then turn left on the other side. Soon you'll see a winding pathway going up towards the northern boundary of the park. Go up there and you'll find it at the top. They have some abstract metal sculptures that are well worth seeing if you have time. OK, well, now, if you...
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 3. You will hear a tutor and 2 students discussing international student mobility. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi, Nils. Hi, Eva. Come in and sit down. You wanted to talk about your research paper, is that right?
Yes, we've drawn up an outline for the introduction and done some preliminary interviews.
And how did that go?
We've come across some interesting findings.
Okay, well, let's go through what you've done so far. What's the subject?
Right, so we're doing our paper on international student mobility.
We're looking at the overall picture. You know, where overseas students are going in the world to study and why. And we think that picture's changing.
Sounds interesting.
The first thing we've looked at is numbers. And as part of that, how many students there are in total who are studying outside their own country.
That seems easy. It looks like it's around 3 million.
Yeah, but the problem is that the definition of the term international student varies across countries.
Yeah, and because of that, the figure could be much higher.
I see.
Our next question was... Well, we wanted to know what the breakdown of numbers is around the world. You know, how many students go where. But we're not sure how accurate those figures are either.
Yeah, even though it's the fastest growing sector of higher education, some ministries don't include the students at private institutions in their count.
It's quite frustrating. Anyway, next, we wanted to know where the majority of students come from.
This is something that's changing quite rapidly.
Well, that would be an interesting point. What's changing?
Most people know that the largest group of international students comes from East Asia.
But what we hadn't realized is that figures for the US have quadrupled over the past 20 years, and a lot more students from Europe are also now studying abroad.
Aha!
Yeah, we need to look at some more figures there.
Lastly, we looked at the countries that students go to and the trends there.
Yeah, our question really was about the destinations of international students and whether they're changing.
And they are. Countries like China are providing more higher education opportunities for their own students and for students from places like Britain.
This means that higher education is becoming more, well, there are high levels of competition.
But with that, there's also a spirit of exchange. It's not so one-sided anymore.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
So, you said you'd done some preliminary interviews.
Yes, we thought we'd start by talking to some of the international students in our city.
Just to help us design the web interviews we plan to do.
Okay.
We wanted to find out if there are common factors that students consider to be important when they choose an overseas course.
Obviously, these will vary across the international student population, but we thought some, like cost, might be significant.
Surprisingly, a lot of students said they left finances to their parents, but they did want to know that their university was a good one.
They said they decided about this by talking to friends at home, not by looking at how many degrees or publications the staff had.
That's right. But they were interested in the degrees they were taking and whether when they finished their course they'd get a good job.
Okay. What else did you ask them about?
What sort of incentives they think source countries should offer students to encourage them to return home after they've graduated.
A very interesting question. What did you find?
Well, many said that if they chose to get another qualification, they'd stay or move to a third country to do this.
Yeah, so there doesn't seem to be much point in offering scholarships to get them to return home to study.
What about grants for research?
Post-graduation. That was much more popular, especially if the system let them compete individually for these.
And many students were keen to go home and get a job if they could be sure they'd have a good income and lifestyle.
For example, they felt that the government should perhaps offer tax exemptions so that they could afford to live in a nice area.
Some countries have created special work zones for incoming graduates, particularly in the science field.
Yeah, and some of these include apartment blocks as well.
But as many of the students we talked to were art students, this didn't seem to appeal to them.
Okay. Well, I think that's a pretty good start. Let's just...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 4. Section 4. You will hear a lecture on lions. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
As part of this series of lectures on wildlife, I'm going to talk today about lions, about their history and about some of the work that's been done with lions in recent years. When we think of lions, we tend to think of Africa, as this is the only area of the world where they still exist in the wild, apart from some small groups in the Indian forest of Gir. But you might be surprised to know that lions were once virtually everywhere on the planet. In fact, if you go back 500,000 years, there were more lions roaming the world than dogs or monkeys. You could bump into one in London, Moscow, or LA, in every part of Africa apart from the desert. In fact, the only continents that were and have always been lion-free were the frozen plains of Antarctica, which were obviously much too inhospitable for this jungle creature, and Australia, though there is plenty of bushland there. So what happened? Well, we know for certain that as recently as the 1800s, that's just 200 years ago, lions were being hunted to extinction in some parts of the world, sometimes just for sport. But long before that, about 10,000 years ago, lions started to disappear from various corners of the globe. Scientists believe there was the usual battle with our human ancestors for food in the form of other, smaller creatures, with many lions also being killed to make clothing. So lions may have gone from Europe, but there are plenty of prehistoric paintings to witness their presence, and they reveal some interesting facts. Let's take a look. These cave paintings were found in France. The outlines are slightly blurred because they were hand-drawn using materials like charcoal or ochre, but the images are still very clear, and the interesting thing is that, as you can see, in the past, lions were actually a lot bigger than they are now. They come up to this man's waist. You may think the size has been exaggerated because of the man's fear, but there's plenty of fossil evidence that supports the larger proportions these animals once had, when you compare them with the African lions of the present day. The other curious thing here is that none of the male lions seen in cave paintings like this had the long black or blonde hair around their necks and faces that is called a mane. Now, the lion's mane is another interesting feature of these creatures. No one seems to know much about it. There are none in cave paintings like these. And even today, the date when the lion's mane first appeared is unknown. And there is disagreement among scientists as to what its purpose is. A lot of work has gone into researching this. If you think about it, no other cat has a mane. So why does a lion have one? And a lion's mane can be various lengths and colours, not unlike human hair. Some are long, some are short. They can be black, brown, or blonde, and they can be in good or bad condition. What scientists do know is that when lions fight, they tend to go for each other's necks. And at first, this led some researchers to believe that the mane acts as a form of protection during battles with neighbouring prides. That may be partly true, but not everyone agrees it's the whole explanation. One leading lion expert believes that manes are more to do with attracting females and scaring off males, and he's run an experiment to test this theory out. What he did was to make 5 toy lions and put them in the lion's territory. He made sure they all looked different. Some had long, light-coloured manes, some had short, dark ones, and so on. He put these in places where they were sure to be seen, and for a while the lions ignored them. But eventually they went up to the models, and, well, the female lions were attracted to the ones that had long, dark manes. The male lions weren't. They just kept away from them. What interested them were the ones with short, blonde manes. They approached these and bit or clawed them quite aggressively. When the results of this study were compared with the real-world situation, it was found that lions with long, dark manes tend to be the healthiest, while ones with short, blonde manes are more likely to be injured or sick. Thus, the team concluded that a lion's mane is effectively a status symbol, that it shows how strong and healthy the lion is, and as a result makes the lion more attractive to females.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. In the Ielts test, you would now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet.